Good evening, everyone. My name is Allison B.A. I'm the director at the Goldfarb Center for Public Affairs, and welcome to In the News, a weekly programming that we do here about politics, policy, and the press. I'm really excited tonight to have two wonderful guests with us. We have Mike Federle, who is the CEO of Forbes magazine, and as importantly, or maybe more importantly to our crowd, Colby alum, class of '81. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Yes. And we're also really happy to have tonight here with us Dan Kleben, who is the founder and president of Maine Beer Company. And do not say if that's more important than Forbes, because we don't want to know that if beer is more important than Forbes right now. But we're really happy to have you here, Dan. Thanks for making the time.
Good to be here.
And I'm also joined on stage with Claire Walters, who's class of '26, who's a government and philosophy major. Claire, we're really happy you're here.
Thank you so much, Allison.
All right, so let's get started. So we titled this talk about business and politics, and I think it's, we could talk about a lot of different things. What does politics mean? What's the context? And I think there's sort of two big areas I think about with politics. The first is electoral politics, right? What's happening in an election cycle, and how do businesses navigate that? And then the other is around sort of what's political. What are policies or practices that may seem political? You could think of maybe an environmental policy, maybe something to do with DEI, but those seem to be more political. So I think we'll probably get to both, but I want to just jump right in because we're only a few weeks out from election. How are you as business owners navigating this incredibly divided political cycle, and how are you seeing other business leaders trying to adapt to a time when we are so increasingly polarized in this country? So how are you all seeing? I'll start with you, Mike, because you're seeing it both from the macro and running your own company.
Yeah, and there are tons of examples, but first I got to say this feels like I stepped into a classroom where there was a pop quiz that I didn't know about. So this brings me right back to Colby and years ago. But yeah, I was actually in Washington, D.C. last week doing what's called a fly-in, which is where an association, in this case the News Media Association, will hire lobbyists to go set up meetings with senators and House representatives who are on committees for specific things that you're looking to enact or that are important to the industry. And right now, everything is political. There's politics in every business move you make, and every CEO right now is very cautious about making a statement one way or the other, because you can instantly, it can instantly become a derailing event. Whether I think there was the example of Bud Light last year, that if you step into the cultural wars, you've got to pick a side, and if you pick a side, you're then going to lose half of your following, half of your business, half of whatever. So there's lots of different paths I can go down and talk about this.
Yeah, I think it's interesting too, because we're in a time when a lot of people our students' age are actually asking for businesses to be more engaged on certain issues. So you can see that tension. So is that also coming up?
Totally. So the whole dynamic of corporations or organizations, it's why people start beer companies. And you may be encouraged to start a beer company in the end, is large organizations now have completely flip-flopped, meaning it used to be hierarchical, top-down. You got in at an entry level and you worked your way up a career ladder. Nowadays, it's really flipped the other way. The employees are very vocal about what's important to them. They want purpose in what they're doing, and they want to have a voice in what's going on inside the company. So it's very rare to find kind of the old command and control management teams that you saw when I was getting out of Colby and joining companies. It's much more, in the extreme examples, it's the fear that your employees are going to march down the hall and nail the 10 demands to the CEO's door and say, this is what we want. Now, that has kind of run an arc, and people always debate, is that when jobs are being hired and when economies are good, yes, the employees will have opportunities to do that. When things get bad, will it flip back the other way? I don't think it will, because I think it's kind of a cultural shift that's going on.
Yeah. So Dan, what are you seeing? You're running a business here in Maine that has a big footprint. You have probably a lot of employees that have diverse political views, maybe lean in one direction, I'm not sure, probably goes all over, but how are you navigating it in Maine, which, through a pandemic, through, mass protests, like what are you seeing how the company is having to adapt to that?
Yeah, well, first, thanks for inviting me here. It's an honor to be on the stage and to be talking to a bunch of aspiring young brewery owners. But I'll talk a little bit about my company. So when we started in 2009. My brother and I started Maine Beer Company, and maybe not everybody in the room here knows because of the age, but 2009 there's the big financial collapse. My brother and I was an attorney at the time, and I was laid off. My brother was in finance. He was essentially laid off. I mean, nobody was putting their money in the markets at that point for obvious reasons. And so we were talking to each other, and we decided, we wanted to start a brewery, but let's try to create a company that is constructive and not destructive, because we were looking at all that was going on around us, people losing their homes, being foreclosed on, losing their jobs. And so we started kind of a values-driven enterprise with Maine Beer Company. I always say beer is what we make. It's not why we exist, though. We really exist to kind of prove a point that businesses can actually be very collaborative and constructive to their communities, and can treat their employees well with respect, and provide them a living wage, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So that was kind of baked into our DNA from the get-go. So I think we tend to attract, as an employer, employees who our values resonate with. And we found, kind of true to our thesis, that it's really good for business to be a values-driven company, because we have a tremendous amount of loyalty from our employees. They're excited to come to work. They're proud of what they're doing. And I do think it's something unique about the younger generations in the workforce, that they are looking for that. They want to feel good about what they're doing. It's not just about a paycheck at the end of the day. So we found, for us, that's been very beneficial to kind of wear your values on your sleeve. When I say values, I don't necessarily mean overtly partisan political values. It's much more 30,000 feet. Like we're very into protecting the environment, very into giving back to our communities. Things that can be political if you let them. But the way that we play it's almost above the partisan fray. I'll use another example, just drilling out from my specific company to kind of the larger beer community. I remember after January 6th, I was the president of our national trade association, the Brewers Association, that represents about 8,000 breweries in the United States. And so I've been to DC back and forth lobbying for various things. January 6th happened. In our trade organization, every trade organization in the country was being asked, what is your position? Are you going to support those legislators that sided with, the insurrection? It's a politically loaded term, but I'll call it that here.
The Patriots?
Yeah, depending on what side, whose side are you on? And it was very interesting. I think, who are you going to give money to? And you saw a lot of trade organizations, large corporations who play in that political space, kind of lay down a marker of, okay, we're not going to donate to those who are kind of blacklisted. That didn't last very long. I think the reality set in our political system that as an entity, whether you're a trade organization or a for-profit company, whether you like it or not, you kind of have to. You can't make a lot of enemies, because we have interests we have a two-party system in this country, and there are times when you need to be in bed with the bad people, because they're the ones that can help you advance your interests. So it's not easy, and there's no science to it. A lot of it's a gut. In my mind, they're gut calls, like, are you doing the right thing or you're not?
Perfect for a philosophy major.
Well, Dan, I'll jump off from that and sort of the dilemma many people were facing after January 6th. Like, do we come out and make a statement, and will that hurt our business and our profit? But to sort of broaden it out past the political and more to social issues in general, whether that be environmental stewardship or inequality or any of those others. Do you believe that businesses have a responsibility to take a stance on these issues? And a bit further, do you believe that businesses actually have a tangible capability to make change in these social areas?
Answer the former question first. Do we have a responsibility? I think we have a responsibility to be good citizens. But when I say that, I mean I think we owe it to the communities that we operate in to be not just good environmental stewards, but be community members. Again, treat our employees well. It's a privilege to do business in the United States. I don't think it's a right that we're born with. The communities around us support us, and we owe it to them to support them in return. It's a give and take. Me as a business owner, I am very hesitant to get down below that in the political fray, because I don't want to alienate consumers. I realize that there's a diverse set of opinions in our country, and that's a very healthy and good thing. And I don't want someone coming into my brewery and not feeling welcome. So, like I said, a lot of times it's a gut call. There's no formula. You put in, well, here's the position, or here's what we're being asked to do. Like, what position should we take? I always say that we just try to be as welcoming as we can. Now, of course, there are limits to that. There are extremes on the left, on either side that we will not cross. But I do think companies have a responsibility to take a stand and stand for something. You can't stand for everything. You just become generic. But take a position, stand for it, and be authentic is what I say. That's the advice I would give companies.
That's great, thank you. And turning it over to you, Mike, can you tell us a little bit about how you operate at Forbes along the lines of responsibility to take a stand in something?
Yeah, so it's tricky, but I think if you're guided by doing the right thing, and you always know what doing the right thing is. I had a town hall not too long ago in the midst of a lot of stuff that was going on in the country, not in the company, and I wore the Be Nice t-shirt. I said, this is our mantra. We all want to just be nice. Because cancel culture inside companies or throughout society can really destroy things. And there was a great article that talked about the current election, which is not so much about the economic state of America, which everyone says it's the economy, it's economy, it's economy. It's really about the emotional state of America. And that is what you have to deal with inside companies, that there's a diversity of views, there's always a faction that wants the company to take a hard position one way or the other. We've got to always be thinking about what is our business. And at Forbes, it's journalism. So almost everything we write polarizes, it offends one side or the other, or it tells stories that people agree with or disagree with. And that, to me, has always been the hallmark of successful journalism, is that if you're pissing someone off, you're doing a good job. It's not your intent, but it should be the end result, because you're telling a truth to power, and the power or the status quo is not going to be happy with it. So it's very tricky inside managing companies right now, whether it's the conflicts going on around the world, or social injustice, ESG, environment. We deal with all of those, and we try again, though, as Dan said, you focus on what's important to your business, treat people really well, and be nice. Work on that mantra.
Yeah, and I'll add too. That's one. Thank you for the do the right thing, or our motto is do what's right. So I think
Do what's right.
for the subtle plug of our
I was
motto.
trying to go there.
Yeah.
I go to Maine Beer Co. a lot, so
Which is very true. At the end of the
I live
day,
down the road.
we all have strong moral compasses. We kind of know at the end of the day what the right thing and the wrong
exactly.
thing is to do. But when it comes to the individual company, we've set down a marker very well in our original business plan that look, our focus when it comes to being good corporate citizens is really going to be on the environmental side of things. And so no one's really surprised when Maine Beer Company takes a position on something that is related to that subject area. If we were to start commenting on things that were completely tangential to that, I think it might take some people aback. Like, why? That's not who we know Maine Beer Company to be. So then maybe this goes back a little bit to your question of, if I'm giving advice to someone who wants to start a business and wants to be a values-driven enterprise, try to pick something that you can put some guardrails. It's a useful tool because we can say to someone, like, that's not really, I know you want us to take a stand on this issue, whether it's social injustice or whatever, but our lane is really here, and this is what we're known for, this is what we're good at, this is where we can have the most impact. And it can kind of, in some ways, insulate you from having to take a position on every single topic because you're kind of known for having one lane that you're driving in.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting to also think about how your business is journalism, right? So it adds a whole nother level of complexity to how you engage in this conversation. And I think we think a lot about the press and where the future of the press is going. And Claire and I spoke a lot about that when we were thinking about having you both here in this conversation. And so I'm curious, since you're living in the intersection of business and journalism, how you are viewing sort of the increasing distrust of the press, of journalists, as actually telling accurate stories and information, and is that changing how you are thinking about running the company or thinking about larger concerns that you may have for the economy generally around the press? I mean, you're really sitting in this very interesting catbird seat.
Yeah, so again, there are lots of avenues to go down there. The main concern right now for the press is trust. Certain brands, the New York Times, Forbes, who've been around for a long time, they engender, because of the longevity and the professionalism and the history behind them, we tend to get a pass on that. But in general, the whole press is under tremendous pressure. And what's exacerbating that is all of the new content that's out there. There's more content than ever before. And in particular, with AI coming on, artificial intelligence is scraping all of our sites and our articles already and repackaging them. And that creates a question of, hey, where's this content coming from? Which I think feeds into the fear that no one's going to know where information's coming from, what's good information, what's made up, what's hallucinations on AI. And it's a huge issue for us right now. But what tends to happen in terms of readership and audiences that we have is you tend to have a very rabid, loyal audience who follows you, and then a very vocal online audience that will trash you whenever they have an opportunity. And that's just the way it is now with everyone is able to participate in content. How many are on Reddit here? Are you different Reddit channels? I don't know what you guys use these days, but maybe we'll get that in some of the Q&A. But I always ask that question when I have breakfasts or lunches with employees and ask them, what are your information sources? And every year it gets more and more diffused. People are getting information from all different sources. And I think that's kind of contributing to this sense of what can I trust, what can't I trust.
Right. I think we're almost ready to go to audience questions, but let's just see. Did you want to jump in before we do that?
I'll let the audience.
Okay, let's
come in and I'll
get
jump
your
in later.
voices in, and then I know that I have a few more that I want to do, but I want to see if Erica's got time. I know, where's Alfonso from our class? Alfonso, are you ready for the first question?
Ready or not?
Ready or not, you're going.
You're on.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. So
Oh.
I
Alfonso, can you say your name and your major, please?
Yep. Hi, my name is Alfonso. I'm a government and education major here at Colby. I'm a junior, and a lot of these things that, I mean, you're talking about this politicization of like products, companies, and whatnot. That's really interesting to me. And you mentioned at the start this idea of like Bud Light being, I guess you could say, canceled on the Republican side. Would you say that, well, products are being like polarized? I know I read a lot about your like business in IPAs. I used to work in a beer store because my parents owned one, and we had a lot of IPAs, and those ideas of polarization kind of, or I guess having a cause. Would you say in that sort of spec that products are becoming more polarized with our time, or even having a cause, and just why?
Yeah, on the product, on the the Bud Light front, it was interesting. Last year, in the middle of that, we invited Dylan Mulvaney, who was the trans person who became vilified because Bud chose to send her as an influencer a can, and she promoted it as influencers do to her zillion followers, and that set off unintentionally, the backlash on Budweiser. So no good deed goes unpunished these days, and that becomes the real challenge for companies, is do you want to jump in, even when it's the right thing to do you want to jump into the cultural wars? She was great, though. We had her at our Chief Marketing Officers Summit, which is a perfect group on crisis communications in marketing. And at the end, she said, once that happened, I never heard from the Bud people again. Through all the crisis, there was no communication. She said, I always thought they should have done a commercial. You're in a Western bar, you got like a Kid Rock cowboy on one side of the bar. She's down at the other end in her high heels, and they kind of slowly come together as that Clint Eastwood Western music's going on. And they come together with this ominous music, and then the bartender serves up 2 Bud Lights. They click them and say, there's room in this town for the 2 of us. And that would have been a much better way to solve it than to just take opposite sides. And, there were the haters and the supporters. But it's a sign, again, of that emotional state of America right now. It's a tricky thing. And believe me, Bud Light has red and blue drinkers everywhere. So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question, and I mean, I'll touch on a little bit of what I said earlier. Someone going into your parents' liquor store, and seeing a bottle of Maine Beer Company on the shelf, that might be their first time seeing it, and that's great. But those who are our loyal followers, they know what we stand for. And like I said earlier, we try to stick to the value set that we're selling to our consumer, and that's been, again, baked into the cake from day one. So no one's really surprised if we make a comment that's within our lane. Like I said, it's baked into the cake. It's part of why they were buying our beer in the first place. Now, if we start going outside of that lane, our customers are going to be like, wait a second, we don't know Maine Beer Company for that. Why are they doing this? And I think we would risk, starting to alienate that base of support that we have. I think that's why, let's say our brands and some other, say Patagonia is another. It's a good example of something that probably people are more familiar with. They're very outspoken. But again, it's limited to the outdoor spaces. It's limited to what the founders of that company set out to accomplish. And again, nobody that wears Patagonia is offended when they make a comment about, when former President Trump wanted to, bear's ears out in Utah at the National Monument, he wanted to rescind that order that President Obama authored. No one was surprised when Patagonia did that, and there was no backlash. And frankly, I'd probably say it was probably good for business because it resonated with their core base. It engendered more loyalty. So I think you're I think it's good if you, from the beginning, you have a clear message, clear values, stick to those values. If you start trying to be everything to everybody, I think that's when you start getting in trouble, and that's when you start risking the whole, like, your product's gonna get canceled. So that's kind of the way that we approach it, and we try to just stay true to kind of what we set out to accomplish 15 years ago.
So just let me push a little bit harder on that, because I think what I've noticed from a career in politics is that politicians used to be much more revered, right? We sort of trusted them as leaders, and that has waned. And in fact, people's trust in business has grown, right? When I was growing up, that was business leaders, in the 80s. This was not a time, it was people were out for whatever they could get, and there was, it seems like there's much more of a push now that people trust our leaders. And if they trust our leaders, if that is, do leaders of companies have a different kind of obligation now? So it completely resonates, the idea that staying true to your purpose, your business purpose, would guide your decision making. But what do you do about something like, say, voting, right? Something that is a core democratic issue. Is that an appropriate lane? Is that something that we need our business leaders to speak out on? I love hearing you say that it's clear, but I wonder for students as they think about, like, how do you develop that moral compass? Like, what are how have you navigated that, deciding what is a core value and what is, or even if it's not totally related to the business purpose, what's a core value, and what is something that's just out of your lane and actually beyond the scope of what anyone should expect you to do?
I think this is where small private companies have perhaps a little bit of advantage on publicly owned companies, is that me and my brother own Mean Beer Company. We can do whatever we want with that thing. We don't have to answer to a board, and we don't have shareholders. We don't have any fiduciary obligation to anybody else other than ourselves, our employees, our family. So we can get a little bit farther out there because we made the calculated decision, and we're gonna take the risk to speak out on whatever the issue, whether it's voting, whether it's, again, it could be the issue of the day. It really comes down to me and my brother is it something that matters to us, and do we think it matters to our employees? Does it matter to the organization? And that's a case-by-case basis. But we don't shy away from those decisions. It's not like we say we're not going to ever speak about anything other than something that has direct link to kind of environmental stewardship. We do say things, but we're very cautious. And at the end of the day, it's if my brother, we'll talk to each other like, what do you think? And if we both agree, it has to be both of us that we're going to say something. We will say something, but we try to be tactful. We try to be respectful of all of the stakeholders involved, not become crass or brash about it. That's how we do it. But it's easier for us because we can risk the house. AB Budweiser can't. They have shareholders to answer to. Their CEO can be out tomorrow. So it's a little bit different dynamic whether it's a kind of a small privately held company or a large public company.
We're a private company as well, which does make it much easier. But I know and we write about the large public companies, and that they have evolved tremendously certainly over my career. And the concern for employees and social issues and what the company stands for is hugely important these days. And believe me, there's tons of money and people who are invested in making sure the company's living up to certain standards. Whether the terms that are used, like ESG became very popular 4 or 5 years ago maybe at the World Economic Forum. It was then embedded inside corporates with the Committee of 100, I think, put it on their charter. And the concept is good. In practice, it's impractical that the 3 components of it, environment, sustainability, or environment, social, and governance, they don't operate interconnectedly, especially in the governance part. So you see companies, they're not backing off those guidelines, but they're changing how they talk about them. And again, it comes down to how you communicate your company's story. And that's why communications, writing and talking skills are hugely important, because you say just a little wrong thing these days, and it's the end of something there, or you create problems for yourself. We're owned by now. We were a family-run company. The Forbes family owned the company, much as you and your brother, and they ran it like it was their company. And it probably had, it reflected their views. They have not owned it for a long time. It's a group, an investment group out of Hong Kong, which always surprised a lot of people, that Forbes, which was once known as the capitalist tool, is owned by the Chinese. So, and as a matter of fact, when we've looked at merging or being sold to other parties, U.S. government often steps in and wants to have a say as to who will own media or who will own important companies in America, so that there's not foreign influence on it. And it always it drives me nuts, because corporations, I think, have done a good job on looking in a globalized world, but globalization is now kind of a bad word here in the U.S., and people are turning inward. So my point being that I do believe companies want to do, especially public companies, they need to do what's right for their owners or shareholders, and maximize profits while also being good citizens of the world. But those guidelines kind of change all the time, and they're changing right now tremendously.
So everything's political.
Everything. Yeah, no, well, we talked about that. Coming in, I said, who came up with this topic? Because who doesn't say that politics and media aren't intertwined?
Right. Yeah. Other questions? How about in the middle over here in the orange and white shirt?
Thank you. Hello. My name is Matt or Maddie. I'm a freshman, and I'm probably gonna major in econ. You guys have been obviously speaking about trying not to take a particular side or position, especially in politics, but in order to avoid making your customers feel unwelcome, or and in order to satisfy them, obviously. But I wanted to ask what you think is the difference between businesses taking a side and singers or actors or other media personalities taking a side. And I'm asking this because there's been recent endorsements of Kamala Harris by people like Taylor Swift and Billie Eilish, while on Donald Trump's side, people like Bryce Hall. And I understand you guys have got customers to satisfy, but so do these people in some sort of way. So I wanted to ask what you think the major difference is.
I can speak for my company. I'm not. I don't know if it's not really a written policy, but I'm not going to go out as a company and expressly endorse a candidate. Now, Taylor Swift or George Clooney or whomever, as an individual, they're endorsing, and I, as an individual, am very active in politics and will endorse political candidates. But I think this is an important distinction. I have a personal life, and I'm a citizen of the United States, and I have every right to go and participate in the political arena. But when you're a company or an organization, it's not just me anymore. It's the 120 people that work there. It's the suppliers that depend on our business. It's the retailers. It's the liquor stores. I have to consider a whole universe of interests, and so I'm a lot more cautious about getting out too far on any limb, because it's not just my interests involved. It's a much larger community. So I think there's a difference between an individual taking a stand and an organization, I guess is my point.
Yeah, no, that's great. People say, who won that debate? And I say, whoever Taylor Swift endorsed, right? That was a big win. Yeah, and it's interesting. Dan, I think you had it right before that, what you said on companies that stand for something. It's a lot easier. So Patagonia supporting all sorts of environmental issues. Makes perfect sense. It's easier than going out on a divisive issue of saying, you know, we're anti-MAGA or we're pro-Kamala. For journalists, it's a tricky road. Journalists have rules about not expressing on social media. Like our journalists, when they're on a Forbes social media site, if they can do whatever they want on their own, and even that's new. It used to be as a journalist, you were not allowed to express a opinion one way or the other because you were supposed to be objective and be able to write the story objectively just by the facts. So again, as a media, we do not take a side, we tell the stories. And of course, as I said, once we write a story, people immediately accuse us of taking a side. So, but we have the defense of, we're telling the story. And as media, we get sued all the time for libel, like all media do. And you never lose those cases, as long as you're doing journalism correctly and telling the story correctly. So that it sounds like that's something to hide behind, but it's not. And in my personal life, yeah, I can express, you know, a lot of my friends assume working for Forbes, Republican and right. And those who know me know it's very different. So it's you know, again, you can't make judgments on people, and I don't think in business, I think the smart move is to stand for the things that you want to. Be vocal about the things that you stand for. So freedom of the press is something we're very big on. We were here with Evan Gershwitz last year at the Lovejoy Awards. That was very near and dear to all of our hearts, and as a matter of fact, the day he was released, I happened to be in the Wall Street Journal offices where we didn't know what was going on, but this whole crowd was popping champagne and clapping, and it was great to see. So that kind of stuff.
And Mike, if I can, I just want to jump in here while we're talking about freedom of the press. And I feel like a lot of the younger generation is feeling dissatisfied. We talked about the saturation of the media market and how our feeds are just being inundated with some factual news, but then also a whole host of opinions coming from all these third parties. And in many ways, this is leading to an erosion of trust in mainstream media. I mean, that's a well-documented trend over the last 5 years or even further back. Can you talk a little bit, just briefly, on how that changes how you operate at Forbes and how you maintain the credibility of your reporting and sort of your standing when a lot of it seems to be in jeopardy with AI, with social media, with disinformation campaigns, things like that?
Yeah, media is not for the faint of heart. It's been changing constantly. And you introduced me as Forbes magazine, which is what most people think of Forbes. For 107 years, there's been a magazine. But the magazine business is about less than 10% of our business now. We're digital. We have 80 million monthly uniques. And on that platform, we have our in-house staff journalists. We have what we call our professional and curated specialist contributors who will write on subjects. We also allow marketers to write on the site, directly onto the site. The difference between the three is the first two, the staff and the contributors, do it for nothing, don't pay to get on the site. The marketers do pay to get on the site. And the key is a diversity of voices that we want that are joining the conversations that are happening with or without them, but from under a trusted brand. And the way we make sure that we maintain that trust is you have to be very clear how you identify who it is that's writing the story. Is this a staff journalist? Is this a contributor? Who is this contributor? You can look all that stuff up. And what is this marketer trying to tell me? So to very clearly identify where it gets really tricky, and we read about this every day, is where foreign entities get on and actually are feeding, feeds across X and, all sorts of different platforms. And it makes it challenging for the whole industry to see, what is accurate and what's not. And I don't know the solution because it's only going to get worse with AI initially. Maybe AI will be the solution at some point, but it's only going to get worse with it initially. And that's kind of where a lot of my attention is right now, trying to figure out what the next 5 years look like.
Other audience questions? Okay, I've got Deb first. It's fine to be, yep.
The
And then
wheelchair
we've got
has,
Amanda over there, and I don't know you, but that third. So there we go. Deb, Amanda there.
Hi. Hello, this is on? Okay. Hi, I'm Dev. I'm a senior here at Colby. I'm a government major, economics minor. I have a question for both of you. Hopefully they're interesting. Dan, as a uniquely Maine company, do you think your answer about politics changes when you're talking about, I guess, your hometown, when questions about things happening in Maine, like I can think of big issues like Pine Tree Power or like indigenous rights in Maine. Do you think your answer about politics changes when, as a community leader, people are looking to you for what they should do about our hometown? And the second question I had was to you, Mike. Recently, the New York Times editorial board announced that they're no longer going to be endorsing candidates for New York races, which is ironic considering New York Times. But do you think it represents a broader shift in news media, or do you think this is just a unique phenomenon confined to a brand like the Times that's gotten maybe too big?
Mm-hmm.
That's a great question, Dev. And yes, I do. The short answer is yes. I think that the more local the issue gets, the more important it is for community leaders. That includes business owners to speak out, and it's something we have more inherent expertise. We have more authority when we speak about something that's more local. We probably know much more about it than if we speak about some more generic kind of national or even kind of international trend. So yeah, and we do. I mean, we will. It may not be, again, there's the idea, it's the method in which you do it. I think there's a difference between, say, I am going to write an op-ed in the Bangor Daily News on behalf of tribal rights. Or am I going to contribute, we do a lot of corporate philanthropy, am I going to contribute money to the Wabanaki Alliance? Mm-hmm. There are ways to support causes that I think can kind of accomplish both, you speaking out or supporting causes that are important to you, while I think lessening the risk of public backlash. And I think smart business owners should do that.
Concerning the New York Times, so that's it's really indicative of how the newsrooms are these days. So again, the evolution of journalism. When I started my career, journalists it came out of J School with the notion it's purely objective. You go out, get the facts, and tell the story whichever way the cards fall. Do not insert your own opinion. Do not insert your own biases, which is tough, right? Because we all have that inherently in ourselves somewhere and how we feel about things. But over time, what we're seeing now is a lot more advocacy journalism, meaning, and young journalists coming into the newsrooms are all saying, the hell with objectivity. This is an important issue. I'm going to write about this. And I don't want to write about that. I want to write about this. So there's a lot of turmoil in newsrooms right now. And I think the motivation, maybe someone from the Times at a future speak can give you the exact stuff that happened inside, although I know a lot of the people over there, is they are trying to maintain that standard of journalism where, and getting away from how people feel about the New York Times as being already determined on one side of the fence. And so I think, a lot of people are struggling with newsrooms right now, and this generational difference that's happening between the journalists, what they want to write about versus, and how they write about it versus how their older peers have written about it.
Generational change, I think.
Yeah?
Yes, Amanda? Okay. And maybe hold the mic a little close.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you guys for being here. I have two questions, or I have a bunch of questions.
Name
but I
and major?
My name is Amanda. I'm an education major. I have a bunch of questions, but I'm only going to ask you guys two. One is, and they're very basic, and go wherever you want to go with them, but what brings you here to Waterville, Maine on a Wednesday night? If you're an alumni or if you're from Maine, what do you want us to get out of this conversation? And what are your hopes for the future for our generation?
Wow.
I can tell you why I'm here, because Allison told me to be here. That's not true. I'm happy. I graduated Colby in '81, went out to the coast of Maine, and joined a very small publishing company with the notion I'd be a writer. I got much more interested in the business side of things. One of the magazines was bought by a big New York publisher. So they said, you should come to New York. And so I went to New York. And I was there for 35 years with maybe 4 years in LA. But so life kind of takes you places. And I was away from Maine for 35 years. I always had family here, and I always had, eventually I had a home up here that I used to come visit. And then I got the opportunity during COVID to move back full time. And that's when I started to reconnect with people from Colby and people I knew from Waterville. And so I've gotten a little more involved with the school. I have a feeling they'll keep reeling me in, which I'm happy to do. So.
We're very glad you're here.
Yeah, I mean, for me, getting to do things like this and especially talk to the entrepreneurs, the leaders of tomorrow is it's one of my favorite things to do, frankly, and that's the honest truth. So when Allison and Kate asked me to come here, it was a quick yes. Your other question, I think, was the hope for the future, and that's obviously a very
I dodged that one, huh?
Yeah. I will say, I know we've touched on some of the challenges that a younger workforce can bring to organizations because they are so driven by their values and they are not afraid to stand up for them. While that can be seen as a challenge, I also think that's kind of a blessing. I mean, I think that your generation is much more socially and politically engaged than my generation. I mean, I don't want to tell you what I was doing when I was your age. So that gives me hope. I mean, take climate, for example. Your generation on climate, I mean, it's one of the most engaged cohorts of any voting demographic, because you all realize that, we're, Mike, myself, Allison, we're gonna be gone when the proverbial, X hits the fan, and you guys are the generation that's gonna be left to clean up the mess. So I think it's actually very heartening to see how you're standing up for I'm using the climate as one example. There are many others. So I have a lot of hope that your generation is gonna clean up the mess that we're making.
I will respond to that part. That was a good question. Each generation goes through life, and you see how it changes. I was kind of the tail end of the baby boom generation, which is much maligned these days. But it's the idea. But I remember the generation before me, who was senior executives when I first started, very different. They came out of Vietnam and Korea, and it was kind of a military mindset of organizational structures and command and control sort of structures. I think the baby boomers changed that a little bit. The, millennials and X really changed it quite a bit. What are you guys considered? Like, is there a name for your generation at this point?
Gen Z.
Oh, you're Gen Z. Oh, okay.
Oh, yeah.
I thought you were already back to the A's and the B's, but you're Gen Z. Sorry about that. So you guys, again, just as I said with the journalists, the changes that happen in journalism, they change because people change. The people coming in with new ideas and new thoughts, and that's what always drives us forward. So whatever it is you do, you'll contribute to growth. You'll make some mistakes. You'll rectify the mistakes and go on. I mean, that's kind of what each generation does. So bring your whole self into whatever it is that you do, because you will affect change as your generation goes through it.
I think right in there.
Hi, my name's Anavi. I am a sophomore Gov and Econ double major. So one of our first speakers for this series was Dexter Thomas, who was speaking about the role of social media and how and the role that's going to play in the upcoming elections. And he said something really interesting. He said something on the lines of that we need a change to the very structure within which journalism operates in order to be as objective as possible. So the argument was that the less profit-driven you are, the more objective your news is going to be. And I just really want to know your opinion on that, because this is a pretty contentious remark to make, that the capitalist market economy cannot sustain the journalism sector. And going back to your statement about the capitalist tool remark. So while this is primarily directed to you, Mike, I'd love to know both of your opinions on this.
Did you say he said the more objective, the less of a business they'll have? Is it? I didn't hear
No, he
that
said,
part.
so I'm just saying it in brief, I'm like putting it in really short, but it was something along the lines of the less profit-driven you are, the better, more fact-oriented news you can put out there.
Yeah. Well, that's probably true, unfortunately, because believe me, there is a much bigger business in being very slanted to a particular, echo chamber or a particular belief or group. I mean, Fox News and Roger Ailes, who kind of created Fox News concept, that's a great business. It may be a terrible news source, or maybe a good news source, however you feel about it, but they kind of throw objectivity out of the window in order to create a particular audience. So it's very lucrative. And over the years, I've had lots of opportunities, people coming both to Forbes and other places I've worked, saying, hey, let's start this or let's start that. And it's much easier to be a big business as a provocative sort of right-wing, left-wing, where your purpose is not to be objective. Objectivity these days, a lot of people see as phony. They see it as, well, take a stand one way or the other. I want to hear what I want to hear, and I don't want to hear the other side. So again, this gets, I love that phrase, the emotional state of America. It's pretty fraught at the moment because of that. So I think I agree with his comment, if I understood that right, that the more objective. I talk to a lot of journalism schools, Columbia Journalism, and because of proximity, I go up there quite a bit to and the questions that the students have there are all about that. Like, well, why shouldn't I do this? Why shouldn't I do that? And I think those are fair questions to ask. The model of objective journalism is really only about 130 years old or so. Yellow journalism used to be the standard in the country, and big businesses like the Hearst Corporation were built on slanted view of the press. So anyway, I hope that answers your question.
Thanks, Anavi. I didn't recognize you over there. Okay, that's what threw me. I was like, okay. Well, we got time for a few more questions. How about Erica, can you get up top? I didn't see. have a hand there.
Do we have any English majors in this crowd?
English majors?
Hi, I'm Owen. I'm a senior. My question's more targeted at like business and operations within your various companies. So specifically within Maine Beer Company, how are you navigating headwinds facing the beer industry, specifically the rise of like ready-to-drink cocktails, non-alcoholic offerings, and then an increasing amount of medical studies kind of outlining the ailments associated with consumption of alcohol, and then also as far as Forbes, the rise of like independent journalism and alternative sources of media?
Yeah, I mean, it's, you know, our industry went through a great boom over the last, 10-ish years, and it's, definitely kind of plateaued. So there are, I don't know if it's necessarily headwinds. I think it's kind of more of a normal industry maturation. But I'll go back to kind of how I started, and how do we, maintain our relevance, maintain growth. And I firmly believe it's because the story that we have to tell. There was a guy who bought an old dilapidated brewery in San Francisco back in the 60s. His name was Fritz Maytag of the Maytag family fortune. They washers, dryers, etc. And he was famous for telling folks in our industry, to be successful, you have to have two things. You have to make good beer, and you have to have a good story. And we really took that to heart, my brother and I. And I really think the fact that we focus like a laser on communicating our story. Who are we? What do we stand for? Because there's a lot of good beer out there. There's a lot of good magazines out there. Go to any consumer product category. What's going to separate you at the end of the day is, do you have a story to tell, and does that really resonate with your consumers? And so for us, we're always going to be laser focused, obviously, on making the best beer we can, but also telling people what we stand for. I think that for us has been the recipe so far for success.
So your question on alternative forms of journalism, I hope I haven't painted a negative picture of journalism, because in truth, if you're interested in journalism, it is the absolute best time to get into the business, because you can, at a very young age, as you see a lot of creators and influencers do, you can establish a portfolio that would have taken you years in the past to kind of establish your portfolio and say, I want to, get this job or move up the ladder. Whereas now you can become a publishing company unto yourself. And among professional journalists who've been at it a long time, does anyone subscribe to anything on Substack? So yeah, okay, so Substack's out there. That was a really unique new model that journalists who felt they weren't getting the support or the money that they felt they could earn themselves, they had built a name up, are self-publishing on Substack and creating their own audiences, charging for some of it's free. There are different models to it, but there are people making millions of dollars on a Substack, where as part of a big staff they were making a fraction of that. So there are more models and more opportunities, and entry level is, again, you can create, if you develop a following of hundreds of thousands of people, you've got a business. So I'd say it's a great time to be in journalism, and challenging for traditional journalists. And no one wants to be called traditional anymore, because you've got to stay on top of it and continue to innovate.
Well, I just realized we're at 7, so unfortunately we're out of time. I want to thank you both. I feel like this has been a very different conversation than the ones we've had the last 2 times, and fascinating. And I want to thank you both. I feel like you've demonstrated leadership from a different angle than we've been seeing. And I think my takeaways are sort of, when you all are thinking about your futures, right? We do what's right? Do what's right. Learn how to communicate. So yes, Colby, writing, communication skills, let's go. and that understand that things are political, right? And that you're going to come up with tough decisions in your career, and that they may be hard to navigate, but stay true to your purpose, and that those things will continue. So you all are incredible role models for our students, and we're really, really grateful for you to be here. And of course, always grateful to have one of our amazing students on the stage with us. So I want to thank you all for being with us very much.
Thank you.
And I will just say, before we all leave tonight, we've spent a lot of time talking about